Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The Trump administration has been cracking down on immigration, and new U.S. policies are bringing new challenges to college athletics. A Duke basketball star has been at the center of one case that illustrates what universities are doing to keep their athletes in the U.S. WRAL sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy has been following the issue, and he joins us now. Murph, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Brian, you recently reported on immigration issues affecting student athletes. You started your reporting with the story of a Duke basketball star and a Duke administrator at the Final Four. Set the scene for us.
You know, Duke lost in the Final Four, the national semifinal, to Houston, and one of the big storylines of that game was that center Kamen Malawach, 7'2" star for the Blue Devils, likely top 10 NBA draft pick, had 0 rebounds. It was clearly seemed impacted by something in that game. And just moments before that game, or several hours before that game, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said that he was revoking the visas of all South Sudanese passport holders. That would presumably include Malawach, who is from South Sudan, a war-torn country that only really gained independence in 2011. And so one of the questions that I've had ever since that game took place is, when did Malawach find out about this tweet, and when did it have any impact on his performance in that game?
Now, you spoke with some administrators who told you kind of what was going on. They were not even watching the game at that point. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, think about it. Final Four game, and the athletic director for Duke University, Nina King, is on a concourse huddled with other Duke administrators trying to figure out what this statement from the U.S. Secretary of State means, at the same time that the Duke basketball team holds a 14-point lead in the national semifinals. Duke would go on to lose that game, but Nina King says she barely got to see the second half of that game as Duke lost that lead because she was dealing with this issue.
And they're just focused on how to keep this guy in the country, right?
Yeah, I think mostly focused on what does this mean? You know, here is a player who obviously committed to Duke. They've invested a lot of time and energy into him, and now all of a sudden the Secretary of State is saying he may not even be able to stay in the United States. I think their concern was for him as a person and also him as a basketball player with a bright NBA future. What can we do to help?
Now, Duke isn't the only school dealing with this. Malawach isn't the only one in this predicament. Lots of NCAA athletes are here on student visas, right?
Yeah, not many from South Sudan, which is important to this story, but more than 25,000 NCAA Division I and Division II athletes are international. We did a quick look at Duke's rosters and UNC's rosters and NC State's rosters. From more than 140 athletes list a foreign country as their hometown or foreign city as their hometown. And so this is an issue, particularly in certain sports. Women's tennis, for example, men's and women's tennis have a high percentage of international athletes in that sport at the NCAA level. So this is an issue that, cuts across sports, cuts across the divisions, cuts across, the entire country.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about other immigration issues affecting student athletes in the U.S. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy about immigration policies affecting student athletes. Murph, the latest visa issues for student athletes come as part of a broader shift in U.S. immigration policy, especially as it relates to students, right?
Right. The Trump administration certainly has made immigration one of its biggest issues in its first 100 days back in office. And in particular, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has made student visas an issue. More than about 1,500 student visas were revoked. Many of those have been reinstated as the administration faces court battles over them. Marco Rubio has really focused on students who protested over the Israeli-Hamas war and the war in Gaza. We've seen some of that at local campuses, but has really gone after some students who participated in those. And at local campuses, we saw 6 students at UNC have their visas revoked. We saw 2 students at NC State have their visas revoked, and they were from Saudi Arabia. They ended up leaving the country so as not to jeopardize their status, and they weren't back. I don't believe they returned when the student visas were reinstated.
Now, foreign student athletes aren't just worrying about the possibility of being booted from the country. They're dealing with some other immigration law issues, right? Especially around NIL, right?
Yeah, it's been an interesting issue since NIL started, and that was in 2021. NIL, of course, is name, image, and likeness payments that college athletes have been allowed to receive since 2021. And starting this July, may be able to receive direct NIL payments from schools, what many are calling revenue sharing payments. However, international students, because of the visa that they are on, are technically not allowed to work. They are not allowed to accept payment for jobs in the United States as part of the visa that they're on, usually an F visa. And so they've been dealing with, some of them, their teams are taking international trips and they're performing NIL work when they're on that international trip, so they're not in the United States, and that way they can be paid NIL money when they get back into the United States. But it's been an interesting area of law and an interesting area of compliance that these international athletes have been dealing with. Now you add the settlement where those direct payments may be coming from the school, and then you add all these other things that the Trump administration is doing, and it really has been some thorny issues for international students.
Now, Malawach isn't coming back to Duke. He's planning on going into the NBA next season. Did he manage to sort out his immigration status? And if so, how did he do that?
Yeah, we really don't know. We haven't gotten a direct answer. Malawach is performing at the NBA Draft Combine, was asked about visa issues, said, I'm not really focused on those, that I'm letting my agency deal with that. There's been some reporting that he also has a Ugandan passport. As I mentioned earlier, South Sudan has been rife with civil war for almost a decade. Malawach's family actually were refugees into Uganda, and so there's a possibility that he has a Ugandan passport as well that may help him with some of these issues. Really getting back in the country could be an issue. So think about it, if he were drafted by Toronto, being able to come into the United States frequently to play games may be a problem. But one final thing on that, Nina King, the athletic director at Duke, said that they have worked extensively with the NBA. The NBA has an NBA Africa office. The NBA is probably well-equipped. It has a lot of international players, probably well-equipped to deal with this issue, perhaps even better equipped than Duke in some ways.
And what about student athletes who might be in a situation that's similar to Malawach, but who plan on staying in college? I mean, they're going to have to figure this out, right?
Right. I talked to several different lawyers who talked about the question of whether you travel back to your country this summer. School is over if you're in college, and you may want to go home to your home country. There's been some question, Nina King even raised it at Duke, saying we've had some athletes who decided just to stay here for the summer because they didn't want to do anything that may jeopardize their studies at Duke and their ability to play sports at Duke. I talked to other lawyers who said, look, I would be very careful when I went home. I wouldn't get a DUI. Like any kind of trouble you get in may impact your visa status, which is a very, no one's advocating for DUIs, but that's a tough line to stay on if you can't get in any trouble at all whatsoever in either the United States or your home country. So they said just be very careful about what you do and then stay abreast of whatever changes there may be in immigration law and give yourself lots of time to get back into the United States if you're trying to get back for school or back for sports.
What else are schools doing to keep their athletes here? What are they telling them as they go into the summer?
Yeah, almost every school has a dean of international students or someone in charge of kind of international students and navigating this world. I think, many of those same issues that I just talked about, do you travel home? Do you not travel home? Do you make sure you stay on the right side of the law and not give immigration officials or State Department officials any reason to think that you may, you don't deserve to be here on a visa? Marco Rubio talked about a one-strike policy that was mostly in relation to sort of supporting or protests involving, Gaza and Hamas. But, one-strike policy could be very, very broad. And so these international students, look, most of them are from Canada, Western European countries as well. There's not too many from South Sudan or Saudi Arabia or some of these countries that may find themselves on travel ban lists. But, there are 120 different countries represented at NC State among their international students, not just athletes, but all international students. And so there are many, many different issues that come up, and these colleges are trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Well, we know you're going to be watching as it develops. Thanks, Murph.
Thank you.
That's WRAL Sports Investigative reporter Brian Murphy. For his in-depth report on foreign student athletes, go to the education section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of the morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.